Today, I wanted to talk about some things that are not a part of Scrum. You will find that in the general Scrum community, they call these things generally accepted Scrum practices. Um, and that's a good name. I'm good with it. I don't like to call them that. I call them commonly used Scrum practices because whether it's accepted or not, I'm good with that. I call them just commonly used practices, but it's because it's kind of like what I see. And let's talk about some of those practices. Well, let's talk about where Scrum is at first, okay? Ideally, if you really go and look at Scrum and you go to the last page of the Scrum guide, you'll see that the Scrum guide is only Scrum in its entirety and functions well as a container for other technologies, methodologies, practices, so forth and so on. You will see that. So literally, last page of the Scrum guide, like the last two or three Scrum guides, that's the way it's been, right? So I don't even look for it anymore. I know it's just on the last page, it says that. Scrum functions in its entirety, serves as a container, yada, 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 right? So that means you can add whatever you want to the Scrum. And when I think about Scrum, I just think about it as a time box plan that you evaluate daily and you learn about the product and the process and you do it again. That's how I think about Scrum. Now, there's obviously 5 events associated with that. You got 3 roles, 3 artifacts. Those 3 artifacts have 3 commitments, one each, right? So that's what Scrum is really made up of. It's nothing more than that. So things that are part of Scrum that you generally see that's just there, okay? One thing that's probably there that you may see that some people use that was a part of Scrum at some point is these things called burn charts. I still know people who fundamentally look at burn charts. I haven't physically created a burn chart in many, many years. In many, many years, okay? I love to hear from the audience that's here in the chat. When was the last time you seen a burn chart, right? But let's talk about what a burn chart is. A burn chart, they was around Scrum a while ago. Like they've been around Scrum for a long time, right? And so they used to be a part of Scrum. They were required as a part of Scrum, right? So again, let me say this again. Tell me when was the last time, just drop it in the chat, that you actually used a burn chart. You used a burn chart, right? So over the years, there's been a leaning away from the burn charts, okay? For many, many reasons. And so, but they used to be a part of Scrum. They used to be an artifact related in Scrum. So if you look at older Scrum guides, you will see that it exists there. It really does exist there. But in today's world, it's not a part of Scrum. Now, when was the last time I truly used a burn chart? Like literally used a burn chart outside of the classroom environment. I still teach it in the classroom environment because I want people to be aware of it just in case they need to be aware of it. I really, really do. So, when was the last time I used a burn chart? Truly used a burn chart? 2014. Like, literally 2014. Okay? Now, normally I've walked away from burn charts because they've caused me some heartburn, some heartaches, over time. They really have, for various reasons, right? And I remember a team chastising me at one point about me forcing them to do a burn chart because it was a part of Scrum, and I was thinking you should do everything. Saying to me, we don't need to do it. It serves us no value. And then me, right, getting it at that point, right? But I literally haven't jumped on using a burn chart unless I find a pull for a burn chart. Now, it's likely for this client I'm going to deal with, I'm going to have to probably pull out burn charts. But I'm probably going to pull out a release burn chart and not a sprint burn chart, right? Let's see. Let's talk about it real quick. I see Shane says this 3 months ago they used a burn chart. Sabrina's never used a burn chart, but I think Sabrina's new, so I don't think she has had the opportunity to have some real big exposure to burn charts. Yeah, we barely look at our burn charts nowadays. We try to stay at the top of blockers and real time day to day. So let me make sure I identify who gave Sakib gave you that. Okay, I thought that was you, Sakib. So really, when it boils down to it, the usefulness of burn charts. just don't seem to be the same way that we once thought that they were, right? And probably the main reason why a lot of us don't use it is because it turns into um, something negative, especially when the team is not delivering as some outside parties think that they should, right? Um, here we go. Jay Allen is saying, hey, I'm new, so I ain't never used it. I get it. It may not be something that you get much exposure to. Matter of fact, for most of you all, it's in a tool anyway. So you'll probably never create one, right? Let's see. I might use them low key to show the team. Never should they be used as a tool for management to monitor teams. And Philip, this is where I had a problem at because I find that a lot of times management use them as a way to ultimately punish the team because it's a no-win situation. You either getting everything done or you're not. Even if you're ahead, it's just like you're just getting everything done. So it normally for me is a zero-sum game with a burn chart. So I really don't dive too deep into them. Seriously, I don't, right? Now, I will flip that and say this. If it is a release that I need to provide some perspective on, if I have a pull for it, okay, so now for us, this is clear. A push is like a push notification. Something that's just given to you regardless of where you want it. A pull is something you go and you go get. If I have someone that's going to come and get it, then I might feel different about it, completely different about it, okay? So burn charts, just be careful on how you use them. I would agree completely with Philip here. As a tool for management, I don't think that may not be an appropriate use for it. Show the team, see how things going, see how they collectively perk. I get that one, right? Completely get it. But I only really use it at all if there's a pull for it. I'm just being 10,000% honest, right? So, what else? Probably the probably the next most popular, and I wouldn't even say that the burn chart's the most popular, but probably one of the most popular ones. It falls between two, right? It's either gonna be user stories or it's gonna be story points. These are those next two that really, just kind of crush you, right? So, here's the deal, right? I'll ask the question once again. Throw it in the chat. Are you where you're working at? Are you actually using user stories? Just drop it in the chat. Tell me in the chat. Are you using user stories, and are you using them the way that they were designed to be used? Now, let's talk. Okay. For me, I've always used user stories. I kind of lean toward user stories, right? I like user stories because they give the perspective of the user. Now, understand my mindset here, right? So, for me, let's go to the base level here. What is a requirement? A requirement is a usable representation of a need. Boom. I got that out of, I think, the Business Analyst Book of Knowledge version 3. Something I got that from someplace like that, right? That's not mine. I'm giving credit where credit is due. So, a requirement is a usable representation of the need. Okay? Now, a user story is one type of a requirement. Like a business requirement, a technical requirement, a use case. All just different types of requirements. Now, in the beginning of my career, I was used to translating or turning business requirements into user stories. Okay? That's what happened. Until I realized that I'm writing requirements twice. All you have to do is do it once or twice to realize you're writing requirements twice. And now you feel a little different about it, right? But user stories have been around forever and a day. I believe user stories was a part of extreme programming, right? And it's just a part of building, that story. It was designed to be a conversation, like you're sitting around a campfire, and having a conversation with the user, the customer, about what they want. And it goes from being something that you have a card, you have a conversation, and then you do some confirmations, right? The three C's is associated with that. Now, everybody knows a user story format is going to be as some kind of role. I want something so that whatever the reason is. You got to make sure you have acceptance criteria associated with it. Now, do you have to use user stories? According to Scrum, no. No, absolutely not. Scrum does not prescribe or recommend that you use user stories. Again, this is a commonly used Scrum practice. It really, really is. Because I would think that the majority of teams out there are using user stories. So let me know in the chat if you are using user stories. And if you're not, tell me why. Tell me why. I see Sakib out here, right? Here we go. Your name showed up this time. That's interesting. It didn't show up the last two times, right? We're using user stories, but we don't follow the same old template for writing them, right? We just try to use a normal, understandable language to make sure that the user story has proper requirements. Okay, understandable. So some modification to it, but Scrum finds that to be acceptable. Whatever Sakib is doing is acceptable from a Scrum perspective because anything we put in a product backlog is fundamentally called a product backlog item. That means that once we put that user story in a product backlog, it's called a product backlog item. But that would be another one of those commonly used Scrum practices, right? I don't know too many teams that's not using some version of a user story, right? They might have a little foundation in the user story and then they switch it up, like they won't put the Y part there or they'll change it up a little bit. But whatever it is, they kind of move forward in that direction. And that's okay because it is just one of those commonly used Scrum practices, right? Now, let me talk about the third one. The third one is story points. The story points, man. So, first statement, right? Am I really a supporter of estimation at all? Absolutely not. Because normally you're asking people to estimate when they know the least amount of information. Okay. And when they know the least amount of information is when they're going to get it the most wrong. Okay. So, and then you don't want people to change it, right? So, if that's your philosophy on estimation, then I'm definitely completely against doing it, right? However, story points is one of the staples that's associated with Scrum. Story points really, really is one of the staples that is associated with Scrum. So then, if you think about it for a second, how many of you all are actually using story points? Drop it in the chat. If you are using story points and you are actively using story points, drop it in the chat. If you're not using story points, hey, just tell me how long ago it was since you last seen a story point. Okay? But what is a story point? A story point is a relative measure of size. What is size? Size is a combination of complexity, effort, and risk. That's what a story point is. But I said relative, right? I said relative. And that's the key statement. It's relative, right? That means if I have a data point like this phone, right? And then I have another data point like this iPad, right? If I take this phone and I give this phone some miscellaneous value like a 3, the question is, this iPad relative to this 3, what it takes to make this in terms of complexity, effort, and risk, what would the value of this be? Drop it in the chat for me. If this is a 3, then what is this relative to it? Now, if you're going to use a number, we classically use the Fibonacci sequence, where it goes 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, so forth and so on, right? Or maybe you just go 13, 20, 40, 100, whatever that is. So look, do me a favor. Let me know if this is a 3 to make this phone right here versus making this iPad right here. If this is a 3, what is this relative to it? The relativity is what matters there. Just drop that in the chat for me because that's all the story point is. It's taking a known and understanding what an unknown is based on an or relative to the known. That's what it truly is. It's nothing more than that. I find story points to be a beautiful thing, but I also find them to be used against people, right? Because if you're going to story point, you need to be able to do something with that information. And any of this data you can actually manipulate. I could tell you stories about that at another time. But the idea is really, really very simple. Most teams use them. Whether they're right or wrong with them, most teams use them, right? So let's see, Philip, yeah, I use story points. Jay Allen, yes, I use story points, right? Yes, I use story points, right? Yeah, story points are being utilized. I even got Philip throwing a 3 out there, right? Yep, using story points, right? But I always remind the team that they mean absolutely nothing unless we use them to compare them against one another, right? That's very, very true. Very, very true. And I can't compare them across teams. So story points have some value. They really do. Because if you have a story point, you can actually complete story points. And if you're completing story points, then guess what? Guess what? You could probably determine a velocity, because velocity is average story points completed. That's it. So you can get a velocity. If you get a velocity, you can actually guesstimate how much you can get done within a certain time frame, or figure out how you can manage the triple constraint. And that's a whole nother conversation. One day, when y'all ready for it, I'm going to give you some forecasting 101. How about that one? No, we're going to do 301. We got to go higher level, right? This is the 101, okay? But as Philip says, sprint estimation, period. It's not roadmaps. It's not. It's not. It's not guaranteeing you can get everything done. It's just not. It never can. It's going to be a guesstimate, a forecast of where we're going to go, and likely you're not going to get exactly that forecast. So when you really just sit back and think about it, story points is an amazing tool, used correctly. You can't use it with evil in your mind. That's so stupid. You can't use it with evil in your mind, right? That's the main thing there, right? And so, I know with the client that I'm going to be dealing with, that guess what? They're going to probably use story points. Guarantee you. I guarantee you, because they just are. I guarantee you. I'm not going to be, even if I tried to fight them on it, it ain't going to go down any different than that. So realistically, if you think about the things we just talked about, probably another one, and I'm probably going to stop here because I'm stop soon. Let me move on past the story point situation. Another thing that is a commonly used Scrum practice is refinement. And refinement is always interesting, because refinement is the detailing of the product backlog out into more detail, right? To make the product backlog better. That's ultimately what product backlog refinement. Again, we stopped calling it grooming. Even if you want to call it grooming, I guess I'm okay with it. Just know that people in other countries look at grooming as being associated with pedophiles, and that's the reason why they don't, want to use the term. So we use the term product backlog refinement instead. So when it comes to product backlog refinement, it's just about making that product backlog better. But tell me if this is not you. Isn't your product backlog refinement sessions directly proportional to how involved your product owner is or is not? Like, there's this negative relationship. If the product owner is engaged very much, you have to do more refinement. If the product owner is engaged a lot, you tend to do less than refinement. Tell me if that's your equation. I guarantee you, for anybody in here that has to do with it in refinement, tell me if that is your equation or not. Your product owner is either not available, not engaged, don't have the domain knowledge, and when those things happen, it proportionally increases your refinement activities, right? Because we're refining what? The product backlog. In Scrum, who owns the product backlog? The product owner. So guess who should be doing the ongoing activity of refining the product backlog? Product owner should be, right? But for a lot of us, we don't have product owners that's that good. For a lot of us, we don't even have product owners that's available, right? We don't. We don't. A lot of us don't. And that happens, right? That happens. And that's okay. That's okay. I will say that's probably one of the most popular ones as well, that's considered to be something that everybody does to some degree. And yes, you're going to do refinement. The product owner can do that by themselves, right? But when most people are talking about refinement, they're talking about setting up a separate meeting for us to do stuff. For us to do stuff, which again is just amazing, right? It's always amazing to have that stuff happen. So that being said, I think we'll leave it at that.